Welcome to Saturday Night at the Movies, the podcast that celebrates classic, cult, and current films and the people that made them, and many other aspects of pop culture. I'm your host, Steve Rubin. Our producer is Ben Shrewsbury, and our signature theme was composed by Greg Lerhoff. Here it's always Saturday night, and our mission is to chronicle film and pop cultural history one memory at a time. Tonight we are delighted to have as our guest best-selling author and screenwriter, film historian, and journalist Stephen Rebello, who previously wrote the terrific film book Alfred Hitchcock and the Making of Psycho, and now has a fabulous new book entitled Criss Cross, the Making of Hitchcock's Strangers on a Train, which I've just read, and it's a fascinating, extremely well-researched look at a screen classic that just so happens to be one of my all-time favorite movies. Welcome, Stephen.
It's great to be with you, finally. It's a really lovely introduction.
Thank you. Very, very well deserved. Let's go back in time to your youth, or as Fred Gwynne says in that crazy movie, Ute.
The Utes of America.
The Utes of America, exactly. Film-going family? Did you go to the movies a lot with your parents, or were you left kind of on your own?
Both, actually. I went with my parents, and when they got tired of seeing 2 or 3 movies a week, as we did, I went on my own. We saw lots and lots of movies, and my parents were great to see movies with because they were very funny and very sardonic, and when something was ridiculous, they let it rip. And I have that same sort of bent to loving and at the same time mocking certain kinds of movies. But they were big fans of great movies, and they loved Hitchcock. So I got to see, as a kid, The Man Who Knew Too Much, and that was the one that I most remember because my dad was tall and gangly, and he kind of looked like James Stewart. And my mom was a blonde and had a lovely voice and was quite vivacious and beautiful. And so I thought I was Hank, the little boy, and I could be kidnapped. And it was terrifying, even in the back seat of an Oldsmobile at the drive-in. So I got the bug very, very early.
What city was this?
I was born in Fall River, Massachusetts, mostly famous for Lizzie Borden. But I grew up across the river, across the bridge in Somerset, Massachusetts, southeastern part of the state. So I spent a lot of time in Newport, Rhode Island, and Cape Cod.
A New Englander.
Somerset.
What was your go-to movie theater called? I've been asking a lot of the guests these days as we go across the United States. Do you remember what your favorite movie theater was?
Yes, it was the Empire. And it was just as grand as it sounded. Fall River was a very wealthy industrial city. It had boomed during the great days of American economy, and the theaters were very opulent. The Empire was my favorite because that's where they showed most of the horror movies and the sci-fi movies. So that's where I got to see William Castle movies and all my gateway drug movies. Vincent Price movies and Mario Bava, and that's where as a moviegoer on my own, I really sort of came into my own sort of identity as what I loved and what really excited me as a kid.
To this day, I was a big fraidy cat, by the way. I was an only child, a very sheltered only child. So I would generally go with my friends to the movies across the street. We lived across the street from the Fox West Coast Stadium in West LA, which has been a temple for 45 years. But I remember just spending most of my time in the lobby because I couldn't take horror at all until William Castle released 13 Ghosts. And I have vivid memories of holding that little strip of colored thing across my face. You had the option. You could see the ghosts or you couldn't see the ghosts.
See them. Yeah. I was my ghost viewer, which is yonder, is one of my prized possessions. I saved it from when I was a kid.
Oh, there you go. And of course, you watch these movies years later, and they're almost silly. but
No, they're fully silly. Let's be real. They're quite silly, and all the more charming for that.
You know, I miss the
Oops,
show. I miss the showmanship. You know, Castle was a true showman. And in those days, there weren't 19,000 other entertainment things that people could get involved with and didn't have to go to the movies. Then it was the movies. And I remember those days well. I'm so glad we're talking. And when I found out that you were doing a book on Strangers on a Train, I just lit up because this to me, there are a lot of Hitchcock movies I like. Probably my very favorite is North by Northwest for many reasons. But I think Strangers in a Train holds a special place in my heart just in terms of the thrill ride and the fact that one of the most likable, easygoing actors ever, Robert Walker, plays this despicable villain. And it just seems incongruous that this could happen. But let's go back. Now, you say that you got into Hitchcock with the family. You saw a lot of the early films, including The Man Who Knew Too Much, which everybody's saying, oh, the original with Peter Lorre is much better. And hello, what? I don't admire his early movies as much as I do his later ones. And as we talked about pre-interview, I'm a big film score collector, and God, Bernard Herrmann is one of my gods. I mean,
Yeah, I'm with you. He is the voice of those films. He's almost the motor in some ways of those films. And often when Hitchcock is a little, to my thinking, a little reticent emotionally, Herrmann comes in and just kills you with, what the character is feeling and not telling you how you're supposed to feel, which is something I don't like in any kind of music or any kind of direction. I don't like, trust me, I know how to think and feel. But Herrmann there's so many things about him, but one of them is that melancholy, that bittersweet feeling that he has, and you hear it in almost every score, but it's such a beautiful match and mirror for Hitchcock.
And simultaneously, while he was doing the Hitchcocks, later on he would work with Ray Harryhausen and do those wonderful special effects movies like Seventh Voyage of Sinbad and Three Worlds of Gulliver and Jason and the Argonauts. And then
the scores they have too.
Just amazing scores. So you did a magnificent book on Psycho. When did you decide that you've got to do Strangers on a Train?
Probably a long while ago. I mean, when I did the book on Psycho, it wasn't the Psycho that everyone knows now. It was a book that no one wanted to publish, and even the people who made the film, the ones who had been in part of the Hitchcock unit for a long time, said, "Oh, why don't you do one of the better films, or one of the films that's much more important?" Psycho had a real, for me, Psycho was my bridge between the William Castle movies and something bigger and something more important, if I can say that without sounding pretentious, where you were in the hands of a real filmmaker, an extraordinary filmmaker. And that film was very, very special to me, and it had an enormous, enormous impact on me. And I saw it alone the first time I saw it at not the Empire Theater, but the Durfee Theater, which was more prestigious than the Empire. It was where, things like The Sound of Music and My Fair Lady would play. So it was a more grown-up, important theater. Doing that book was and remains one of the great experiences of my life, because, hearing firsthand from people who were on that set what was happening day by day. And at that time, the Academy had really just gotten in the Hitchcock papers from the family. So to be able to turn over, the daily production reports and, which take somebody goofed on and who was ill that day and who was off that day. off in terms of performance, to read those notes and to read, it felt as though I were in that time. I was there on that set. I could hear those lines for the first time being said on a soundstage as opposed to in a grand movie palace. And that was a really amazing experience for me.
Yeah, I completely get that because when I was writing my first book on the James Bond movies, I was fortunate that Cubby Broccoli introduced me to Michael Wilson at the right time. They gave me all the call sheets for the first 10 movies. So I had the same, I knew exactly what was happening on what they were shooting on every day. And you literally, you're right there. You feel like, oh, that's who that was. And even little things like little bit players and where they came from, it just adds part of it. Now, um, on Strangers on a Train, who was around still when you started your research?
Well, see, that's where Hitchcock and the Making of Psycho comes into play. I have been rehearsing for this book for a really long time without knowing it, because when I was interviewing people for the Psycho book, I kept asking them about Strangers on a Train. And so I had all this information from people who had worked with him forever. Um, so I was able to get things like on a certain day, really the first day of production, Hitchcock on Strangers on a Train told his crew, I'm making my first American movie now, and it starts today. That's, that's a remarkable thing for him to say, but I understood what he meant. And so but I had all these quotes like directly from people who were there, which was, a great gift. And then over time, I'd interviewed the woman who played one of my favorite characters, of course, Miriam Haynes. And
Casey.
Yes, a lovely, vibrant, vital, funny, sensible actor. Truly, she was, just a delightful person. And she was quite frank, because it was clear to me how important the movie was to her, and what the casting process was like, and how she had to wait for so long, and she thought, oh, I didn't get it, or oh, but there she is. And
For the listeners, we just put up a picture of Casey Rogers, who plays Miriam. Um, yeah, it's always funny to interview someone whose persona is entirely different from what they really are like. It's like I've worked with some actors who play terrific villains, and they couldn't be nicer. And it's funny to just be in the same room with them and just talking, etc. But I found that the part of your book where you talk about Casey and her experiences, because she thought this movie was going to be a big break for her, but as it turned, it wasn't.
it should have been.
It should have been.
And you can see why that happened. She was under contract to Paramount, and Paramount's not going to do anything to support a Hitchcock movie that wasn't being made for Paramount, and they didn't care that she had done it. And I mean, even she said to me she wasn't even sure they'd even seen it, or if they did, they certainly didn't care. But also that was part and parcel of what Hollywood did then and what Hollywood still does, which is to keep talent under thumb and
Sure.
to balance and not really support them.
So, in light of your comment that Hitchcock said this was his first American film, where can we say Alfred Hitchcock is by 1951 in terms of his place in the community at that time? He had come to America about 11 years earlier. I guess Rebecca was his first American-made film. But how would you analyze his position at that point in terms of his satisfaction with being the director?
Well, I think that he was very happy at that point to be done with Selznick, and to be out from under that yoke. Um, uh, he is someone who had made some really spectacular movies in the 1940s. Maybe one of my favorites, well, certainly one of my favorites, one of my top three, Notorious. I would stack against anything that almost any other director has done. But the early 1950s and the late 40s were not easy for him. At the time of Strangers on a Train, I mean, before that, he had made under Capricorn, and he had done Stage Fright, and he had done Rope. I mean, and people talk about those movies differently today than they did then, but then they were just considered not particularly top-level Hitchcock movies that didn't perform at the box office. So he was a bit on the ropes, quite frankly, and he felt that he was trapped by his reputation. He was having a very, very difficult time finding material. And so he was thrilled when, this book by Patricia Highsmith, a very different kind of mystery thriller than most women were writing in those days. And he was very, very intrigued by the main thrust of the story, this kind of perfect murder by, with perfect strangers. And then the dilemma of what happens when one of those people who should be a perfect stranger decides to intrude on the life of the other person, and how that mars and complicates and intensifies the relationship between them. So he was very, very intrigued by that central premise, but he didn't like a lot of what Patricia Highsmith was doing in the book. He thought that Guy Haines, the main character being an architect, wasn't particularly cinematic. So he really wanted his screenwriters and his scenarists, Whitfield Cook, beginning with the thing that Hitchcock always used to do, which was basically to do a great long treatment, sometime with dialogue, and then to hire a good dialogue writer, or particularly if the person were a playwright, particularly if the person were a famous playwright. He really liked that because it was, again, prestigious. And so those would be the different iterations of the screenplay until he got to the point where he felt he had something worth shooting. This one, as you know from reading the book, was a bear to wrestle with. He had a very, very difficult time with this screenplay.
Well, the first thing I want to talk about is Raymond Chandler. I mean, I've always assumed until I read your book that this was a Raymond Chandler screenplay, and obviously it wasn't, because apparently Raymond Chandler did not deliver on what he needed to deliver, correct?
Well, what do we expect Chandler to deliver on? Not plotting. I never thought that he was a brilliant plotter, but a brilliant dialogue writer, with snappy, sexy, very American dialogue, and awfully good with small town or city, for that matter, milieu. None of that was delivered in his screenplays, and that's what shocked Hitchcock. Raymond Chandler was not Hitchcock's idea; it was Jack Warner's idea, and various agents had tried to get Chandler and Hitchcock together for other things earlier, but Hitchcock at that point was so upset about the way the screenplay was going, and upset about the numbers of screenwriters, Ben Hecht among them, Thornton Wilder. I mean, everybody turned him down. Arthur Lawrence everybody turned him down. And that startled him, because he thought that what Whitfield Cook had done was very clearly what the movie would be or could be, that everything was laid out. The structure was really quite laid out.
Did Whitfield introduce the idea of Guy being a tennis player?
Yes.
So he's responsible. So if you had to say what percentage of the final screenplay is Raymond Chandler, what would you say?
Well, to be honest with you, I would have to listen to, and I don't always, to what Hitchcock said. Not a word of it is Chandler's, and he didn't want his name on the script, and neither did Chandler, for that matter. But Jack Warner insisted on it for publicity reasons, and Hitchcock's attitude was just pay him off, but I don't want anything to do with him. Chandler was very insulting toward Hitchcock, and Hitchcock could give as well as he could get. So they were just a very bad, as bad a match as Billy Wilder and Chandler were.
Yes, that of course is another story. Chandler, his relationship with Billy Wilder on Double Indemnity. But obviously Whitfield delivered the treatment. And then remind me the name of the writer who really dug into the screenplay.
Jency Armand. She's the one who really pulled it together. And
So a female screenwriter adapts a female mystery writer's book. So that was probably somewhat unprecedented.
yes, and it goes beyond that because Alma Hitchcock's wife, worked on some of it just for speed to get the thing done. And a woman who had been with Hitchcock on a number of movies since the 1940s, who was a whiz as a writer, worked on it as well. So it was women who salvaged the movie because, as you know from reading the book and as others are going to find out, Jack Warner was ready to cancel the whole picture because he thought the script isn't working, it's not coming together, we didn't get the cast we wanted, it's just not worth continuing. So, he was giving Hitchcock ultimatums all the time. If we do not have a shootable script by X date, we're done, or you're done.
Let's talk a little bit.
So it was women who.
Oh yeah. Well, I feel strongly that women should be running the world. It doesn't seem to be happening. Let's see. Let's talk a little bit about casting. Now, Farley Granger is such a likable presence in the movie. I've always liked him. I think some people don't consider him a great talent, but I thought he was very good. He's also previously worked with Hitchcock in Ropes, so Hitchcock was obviously very familiar with him. But did the studio have objections to Farley? I did think I read in your book that William Holden was considered.
William Holden was pursued. That's who Hitchcock wanted. He tried to get William Holden for at least 7 movies, and never did. And that started in the 40s, early 40s, right around the time of Golden Boy, when Holden really broke through with Stanwyck's help as a great potential leading man. So Hitchcock's idea was William Holden, Montgomery Clift, and Grace Kelly. Grace Kelly at that point was known almost not at all as for doing some television and small roles in films, but Hitchcock saw something in her even then, and he thought that she was the one that should do it. So he wanted her, and he wanted the others, and Holden, whatever Holden's deal with Hitchcock was, he continued to do it. He just, was not part of the movie. Montgomery Clift flirted with the idea and then stepped away. And, in the end did, of course, A Place in the Sun around the same time. Grace Kelly was a no-go because Jack Warner said, look, at that point, Jack Warner had said, if I have to borrow from another studio, and pay for William Holden, and then I have to pay for Montgomery Clift, that's going to cost a lot of money. I don't have them under contract. And so I can't pay, or I won't pay for Grace Kelly. So as it happened, after William Holden, John Derek was quite a young, very beautiful looking guy whom Humphrey Bogart was pushing as a star. And he wanted him Bogart bought a novel for John Derek to star in, and Bogart was going to produce. And that movie became In a Lonely Place. Bogart decided that in the end, the work they did on the script was just too good, and he couldn't resist it. So he pushed John Derek aside. And besides which, John Derek was under contract to Columbia, and Harry Cohn wouldn't release him. So that's how careers are made and lost in Hollywood, as you well know.
Yes, there's a lot of Machiavellian things going on at that time, especially with these studio heads being so protective. I was recently reading about how L.B. Mayer wanted Shirley Temple to play Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, and Sanic wouldn't let her do that. And although obviously Judy Garland became the perfect Dorothy, I couldn't picture the movie with Shirley Temple. It would be a wholly different movie. But I like Farley Granger. I think that it's funny when I know William Holden's filmography really well. I've probably seen Stalag 17 about 75 times. I don't really necessarily think of him as a physical actor, although he's done some very big physical parts. Farley is a little lighter on his feet playing a tennis player. Makes a perfect tennis player as far as I'm concerned. Did you like him in the role?
Studied a long time, and he himself and Hitchcock was nervous about all of that tennis stuff because he wasn't sure how to shoot it, with any kind of vitality and the kinds of things that people expected of him. And Farley Granger was a very he knew that this was a big deal. This movie was a big deal for him, and he wanted to get it right. And he didn't particularly like himself in Rope, and he didn't like making that movie. And in fact, I quoted him as saying he didn't want to work for Hitchcock again. And then, of course, that came out in a film magazine. I mean, who knows if he actually said it, but it's the kind of thing that he probably did say. And then suddenly Hitchcock is offering him this plum role that Montgomery Clift, of all people, was going to play. But of course, he didn't tell him that. He told everybody that they were his first choice. Yeah, I mean, I think Farley Granger is perfectly fine. He's certainly, the camera likes him. He registers as someone who is, at least in the movie, he convinces as someone who is quite ambivalent about a lot of things, maybe sexually, maybe he's not as assertive as he could be, because it's easy to think of William Holden as Guy dealing with Bruno, this intrusive, clearly psychotic man, and just punching him in the face and being done with it. And it's interesting that Chandler wrote those scenes just that way. He punches the hell out of Bruno a lot. And the thing that's interesting about it is that Bruno seems to dig it. And the censors would have gone crazy, but Bruno, the more he's sort of abused by Guy, the more it turns him on. And I think that would have been a very interesting thing to pursue on film.
Yeah, but not in 1951, as you say.
Not in 1951 with the Blacklist and the Lavender List. So they had to tread very lightly.
Well, we come to Robert Walker, and I had seen the See Here Private Hargrove movies. He was very fun as a light comedian. Played opposite Judy Garland in The Clock. I mean, he's in Bataan with Robert Taylor. His presence on screen couldn't be more likable. He's the guy you love to like. He's the perfect guy next door. In a million years, I would have never thought of him playing Bruno Antony. But obviously, Hitchcock knew something. And can you talk a little bit about the casting of Robert Walker? Was this supported by Jack Warner?
Yes, it was, because Hitchcock said that he would vouch for him and keep him in line. And keeping him in line was because he was a troubled guy, beneath that likable veneer. His co-workers loved him. I mean, he was a lovely guy to be around, but they knew that there was a shadow. And the shadow was complicated. He was very self-conscious of his face, which was pockmarked from stuff that happened skin conditions that happened to him as a young man. He was extraordinarily shy and not very social. And he as a young man in New York, was getting work in radio while his young wife, Phyllis, was wanting to be a movie star, and really nothing was happening. And then Phyllis became Jennifer Jones, and Hitchcock's old nemesis, Mr. David Selznick, took her under his wing and into his bed and made her his wife, and then determined from that time on that she was going to be a major movie star. And she kicked Robert Walker to the curb, and it destroyed him. It destroyed the little self-confidence he had. Robert Walker, I have to be honest, breaks my heart. It was very difficult for me to write about him because I think because he reminded me a little of my dad, and I know that my dad really responded to his work as an actor, and I think my dad felt an identification with him. So I'll try not to choke up. But the thing about Walker was that, and the thing about Hitchcock always is that he wanted to, with a villain, he always wanted to go for the boyish, the charmer. I mean, that started with The Lodger, and it certainly went on through Psycho. But Joseph Cotten, at the time of Shadow of a Doubt, was also a romantic lead who also almost got the lead in Spellbound. They didn't want Gregory Peck, and Hitchcock didn't want Gregory Peck. But the point being, Hitchcock always saw, I just think he had X-ray vision in terms of emotional issues with people. Also, as I know from being with Hitchcock, he was the most gossipy person I think I've ever met. He wanted gossip. He wanted to know about everybody, what they were doing when the lights were low and the bedroom door was closed. That was what he was most fascinated by. And he stored up all of this information, and he knew information about Farley Granger. He knew information about Robert Walker, and he knew that the way the roles were written and the way the roles could be played, things would be brought out in them that perhaps other directors and other material wouldn't. So he was brilliant at finding out. I don't mean this. He had a sixth sense for knowing what was wrong with someone, where their vulnerabilities were. I mean, I felt that, when I walked into his office. And
tell us about that visit, your first visit with Mr. Hitchcock.
Well, when I was a child back in Somerset, Massachusetts, I used to call Hitchcock on the phone. And what does that mean? I one day picked up the phone because I didn't know that you couldn't, and called him at Universal. And I really think what happened, they were putting in a new phone system in his office. And I think nobody was sure how it worked. It was one of those things where, there'd be 5 or 6 plastic buttons. No one will remember this, but someone as old as I. And they would light up for a certain room or office. And I think Hitchcock literally just pushed a button, and there I was. And, was smart and cocky and funny and a little bit charming. And he just stayed on the phone with me, and we had these conversations. And I remember telling him on one phone call that I had read Marnie, and it was my considered opinion that it was a mistake to do that material.
Wow.
But the wonderful thing about Hitchcock was he wanted to know why. He cared enough to ask this nobody, a kid in Massachusetts, had no connection with the film industry. But why did I think that? And I had reasons why.
How old were you at the time?
That phone call was probably about 12 or 13.
Wow. What a strange opportunity. It's almost, well, I'm not literally calling God, but it is in movie parlance, it probably is.
A little bit. And when Torn Curtain had a world premiere in Boston, I was too young to drive, but a friend of mine did, and we drove to the world premiere 10 o'clock in the morning at the most beautiful theater then it probably is still the best theater in Boston, not for movies anymore, but And we went to the premiere, and so there he was, no police escort, no guards, nothing, in the middle of this beautiful uh, foyer, and these lovely women with French maid outfits wheeled out this magnificent cake with all these layers. Each one had a title of the film, and on top was torn curtain. And he was cutting the cake, and he was giving cake to everyone. And so I thought, well, he knows who I am. I walked right over to him. I introduced myself. He remembered my name and he actually invited me to go to dinner with he and his wife, but I didn't do that. That would have been too intense for me, even for me, as I guess I should say. But I mean, the point being was I had the first book that I ever had on Hitchcock in my hand by George Perry, and it was it was just a list of his films with random thoughts about them, and so I gave the book to him and I said, "May I have your autograph?" And he not only signed his autograph, but he did his beautiful silhouette. The book is right over there still, and then I realized that everyone else after me came up to him and asked him for his signature, his silhouette with the signature. And he pointed at me. He said, "That was the only gentleman who gets my silhouette. That's all.
Oh, wow, what an honor.
That's all I give," which was, I thought, the funniest thing. That's all I give. But in any case, the real interview with Hitchcock was all these years later when I was beginning doctorate work at Harvard, and I had a semester break, and I was madly in love, and I came out to California to be with the person that I had fallen in love with, and within days, I was sitting in Hitchcock's office because someone asked me, "Well, you seem like you're having a good time, but you don't seem like the kind of person who just hangs out in the sun in California or goes surfing. What would you like to do while you're here?" And I said, "Well, I think I'd like to interview Alfred Hitchcock." And someone gave me his phone number, and because they knew someone who worked for a person who worked for Cary Grant, and Cary Grant didn't want to remember phone numbers, so this person was like Mr. Memory. He had all of these phone numbers at the tip of his mind, and so there I had Hitchcock's phone number, and I called Harvard, and I said, "Can I do this story for the Harvard Crimson?" They said, "Are you kidding?" "Yes," the school paper, and so there I was. So there I was, ushered into his office, and he needed to figure out what I was made of. So the first thing that the tip off was I was asked to sit in a certain big Morris chair, and I thought, why are they making such a fuss of my being in this chair? It was quite comfortable. I felt very grand, but the whole office was very very British with hunting prints and all that kind of.
I think I was in that same office because, as I told you, I interviewed him, I think, in 76. Was that before you or after you?
That was before me.
Before you. Yeah, I remember just being ushered into the office. I may have been sitting in that same chair. I keep wondering whether I asked him because I had started my research on the James Bond movies, which I'm best known for. And I thought I asked him if he had been ever asked to do a Bond movie. It would seem logical since Broccoli and Saltzman are casting a wide net, but I can't remember what he said. But let's get back to strangers. Let's go back to Robert Walker. I mean, Robert Walker, you have to give Robert Walker a lot of credit, given the trauma in his life and the fact that the love of his life is now with this other producer. He brought his A game to this part, and I would say in the history of villainy in movies, you would have to put Robert Walker's Bruno Antony in the top 10.
Absolutely. I'd put him in the top five. I mean, I think it's one of the great performances in all of Hitchcock. And he knew it was sirloin. And he told Robert Walker, "I'm going to play him as a homosexual." So they knew immediately. He knew immediately what he was going to do. If one reads the script, I said this the other day, that it's Ernest Lehman was my mentor. He took me on as a mentee, as a writer. But anyway, he always denied that the role played by Martin Landau in North by Northwest was meant to be coded as homosexual. He just said, no, that's absolutely not true. I never believed him for a second. And of course, Martin Landau always said it was his idea to play him as a gay guy. Well, it's right in the script. You'd have to be abysmally dumb.
So here's a question I've always wondered regarding Leonard. Is Leonard his first name or his last name?
No, it's his first name.
It is his first name, because the maid in the South Dakota house says Mr. Leonard, and I often wondered if just simply referring to him his first name with the Mr. I always thought it was odd.
No, see, I had friends who were quite wealthy, and their maids would always call me Mr. Stevens. So that's how I hear it. That's how I hear it.
Okay, very cool.
So Robert Walker was thrilled by Hitchcock's offer. Hitchcock at that first meeting described to a T what he would wear, what food he was going to eat as Bruno, everything. I mean, it was all thought out. And he loved it because Hitchcock was treating him like an actor, not just like a charming guy who was, good with a joke and that women adored because he was sort of hapless and lovable. Hitchcock was treating him as a grown-up and as someone who was capable of more. And you see, Hitchcock had a great affinity for people like Anthony Perkins and Robert Walker and many, many others I could name, because he himself always felt that he was pigeonholed as just someone who was a good suspense director, where he thought, I'm more than that. And so I think he always understood the actor like Janet Leigh, who was, constantly cast as lovable, peppy, upbeat, sexy women in musicals or comedies. But he would see the tension in them, the straining to be more.
Sure.
He really responded to that because it was something he felt in himself. And I love that when he and Farley Granger were talking about the same thing, what you're going to wear, and you're going to do this movie and all. And he leaned over and said to him, because Farley Granger at this point had many run-ins with the law. He had a severe alcohol problem, and he had a penchant, it seems, for getting drunk and beating or trying to beat up police officers.
Oh, did you say Farley Granger?
No, if I did, I'm wrong. I'm meaning Robert Walker.
Okay, that makes more sense.
No, Farley didn't have that kind of rebelliousness in him, but Robert Walker had a really authoritarian issue, and people would say he was drunk even when he wasn't, and he really resented that. And sometimes when he was drunk, he would get very belligerent. So the reason I'm bringing that up is because his image in the press was starting to get quite a beating, and people wondered whether he was going to get into serious trouble, psychiatric trouble. And Hitchcock, who had a wonderful, gruesome sort of personality, said to Farley Granger, "Wouldn't it be interesting if something happened to Robert during the shooting of the movie, or he did something really bizarre?" And Farley Granger was a kind of a straight arrow, not particularly humorous, or didn't get humor. Thought it was a quite odd thing to say, but how could you work with Hitchcock an entire other movie and not get his sense of humor? But I think that what he was saying was there is no such thing as bad publicity, and if Robert Walker is a bad boy off screen, it'll be interesting to see what happens if he plays Bruno and then gets into trouble before the movie comes out. Unfortunately, that's not the way it worked.
No.
Robert Walker was, he was very, very, very proud and happy to work with Hitchcock, and he loved making this movie. And he only had one bad, I think, experience, and it was when he was early on. Farley Granger and Hitchcock were invited to the house of a theater critic, and they got pretty tipsy, and Hitchcock knew enough to get out and take a taxi and go home. Farley Granger and Robert Walker stayed longer, and until Farley was very nice and protective and got them both back to their hotel. And as he was trying to leave Robert Walker's room, I mean, he helped him in because he was pretty tipsy. And as he was helping him get into bed and taking off his shoes and all that, Walker started breaking down, as he often did, crying, "Please don't leave me, please don't leave me." And Granger spent the night, just a lovely thing to do, just trying to support Robert Walker through the night, because the next morning was the first day of shooting. And when the car came to pick up Robert Walker, they were going to shoot at the train station, with the feet arriving and all of that wonderful cinematic business. Robert Walker was in no condition to work and would be late for his call. So Farley Granger called and talked with Robert's driver and said, "You know what? He needs a little more time to get ready. I'll go in, I'll start early, and Bob will come along a little later." And see, Robert Walker benefited from that and knew that Farley Granger had done that for him. And so they started off as rivals. They started being sort of needling each other, but it worked for the movie. But Farley Granger and Robert Walker became very fond of each other because Farley became very protective of Robert Walker, in the course of the movie. And he needed that. He needed people to care for him.
Sure. Now, you mentioned earlier that Grace Kelly would have been a perfect Ann Morton, and obviously Warner was not about to pay for a contract player from another studio. So as you point out in the book, Hitchcock was forced to take Ruth Roman. And there have been people who've said that Ruth Roman was miscast. I don't agree with that. I think she played a very polished Washingtonian daughter of a senator. I didn't have a problem with her. Did you have a problem with her?
Well, you read the book. Did it sound like I did?
Well, I think that I'm trying to remember. I think that you were quoting some of the people who thought that she was miscast. I don't agree. What do you think?
Okay, well, that's a fair question. I think she was miscast. Having read the script, it's clear that this is supposed to be a very elegant, almost like a Back Bay Bostonian. I know what that means because that was my turf. But she knew that. She knew that Hitchcock was wanting her to be something else, and she took diction lessons and elocution lessons, which were paid for by the studio. And I think the thing that's interesting is that Hitchcock was frustrated he thought she was impossible. He just couldn't get what he wanted out of her. But I mean, if you think of the mold of Grace Kelly and you think of Ruth Roman, they're pretty disparate in terms of, appeal. Ruth Roman reminds me of women that I grew up with, sensual, more earthy kind of women, not necessarily upper class, but but interesting and peppery. The thing that frustrates me about her is not her so much as the script not giving her what she needed or what she was best at. Chandler,
you don't see much of the romance between her and Guy. I mean, they're constantly dealing with a lot of tension and dynamics. I mean, the whole story is basically, for those of you who've never seen Strangers on a Train, I'm not going to spoil it, but basically, he's trying to get a divorce from Miriam, who's turned into a real shrew. and won't give him the divorce. And he'd like to marry Ann Morton, who's this, what I feel is a very elegant lady. But obviously, that's not happening. And then, of course, Bruno intervenes. Um, I have to say that I have not seen a lot of Ruth Roman films. I know that she was popular in the film noir arena. In fact, Eddie Muller on TCM talks in his new book, for his latest edition of his film noir, uh, be, about the film noir babes, devotes a chapter to Ruth. The only other movie I've seen of Ruth's is a little kind of tawdry Peeping Tom movie from '62 called Look in Any Window with
which
Paul
I
Anka.
saw with my parents at the drive-in with my sort of like this.
A movie that was on the $1 Million Movie in LA and New York and maybe in Boston. And you know, the whole thing with the $1 Million Movie is they'd run the same movie 5 nights in a row. Apparently, there was so much objection to Look in Any Window. After the first night, they removed it from the schedule. It had to be replaced. But I'll tell you, for me, speaking of females and Strangers on a Train, the young lady who steals the movie for me in certain cases is, of course, Hitchcock's own daughter, Patricia. And she is really funny in this movie. And I know Hitchcock really believed in humor at key moments. And tell us a little bit how you feel about Patricia's role.
Well, he didn't want her. He never even thought of her for the movie. And uh, she she had an agent, she had actually two in succession, two really powerful, smart agents, one of whom was the agent for Montgomery Clift, by the way, who really pushed Hitchcock to just screen test her, audition her for the role. I mean, my goodness, I don't know what he saw, in his mind and in his heart for that character, but she wasn't it. But he thought she would do, and she more than did. She's delightful in the movie. I love her because she's the only person in the movie who says what's on her mind. The others all are speaking in code and secrets and, we can't say this and we mustn't speak about that. She just lets it rip, and she's hilarious. She doesn't come off to me as a 16-year-old, as the script says, but 16-year-old young men and women were very different in the 40s and 50s than they are now. But I think she's terrific in the movie. She makes me laugh every time. And as she does in Psycho, she's very, very funny. And Hitchcock was always funny talking with the press about her. Like we sent her to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. Now we have to see whether it was worth the money.
Stephen, were you able to talk to her?
Yes, because I talked with her for the Psycho book.
Right, of course.
She loved making this. She loved making this movie. She loved working with Farley Granger. They were buddies, and so that was delightful. And she would she would help him with elocution. So they would do Shakespeare in the dressing room, and Ruth Roman would say things like, I think I hear the bard like rolling in his grave. She off screen got a chance to be who she really was, a pretty funny, snappy lady. At one point she was sure that she was not going to please Hitchcock. She just didn't want to embarrass herself or him. But the thing is, no matter who we talk about in this cast, he was never satisfied with this movie because he didn't get the three people he wanted. And he always thought that the film suffered for it. It was a weaker film for him.
Now you say three. You said Holden, Grace Kelly. Who was the third?
Montgomery Clift.
Oh, Montgomery Clift to play Bruno or to play Guy?
No, to play Bruno.
To play Bruno. Ooh, I don't like that casting at all. But that's just me. Now, as I mentioned to you pre-interview, I'm a big Dmitry Tiomkin fan. I think that if in terms of contributors to this movie, I have to give Dmitry Tiomkin a great deal of credit for his work on this movie, starting from the opening bars. You have your overture, and when the feet are approaching the station, dun, da, dun, da, dun, da, 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 da. I mean, it's such memorable music. I bet you're a big fan of it as well.
Well, because it announces the movie. It announces the characters. It announces we're going to have a good time here, and I love the pace of it. I love how the feet are matched to the music, or the music is matched to the feet. But there, Tiomkin and Hitchcock, they were just like peas in a pod on this movie. Hitchcock knew that Hitchcock himself was going to do some sleight of hand. Really, if you look at the movie, and I don't think I'm going to spoil it for anyone, that there's a really important tennis match in which Guy really has to finish it quickly and win, hopefully. And it's cross-cut with Bruno trying to get to a physical place, where he can plant a piece of incriminating evidence that will, sort of condemn Guy. So they both have to do a certain thing, and it's both physical. In Bruno's case, he drops this object, a cigarette lighter, and it happens to fall down a city drain. And so there's going to be a lot of tremendous suspenseful cross-cutting. But if you think about it, those scenes have nothing to do with each other. And it was Dmitri Tiomkin, I think, and the brilliant editing who linked them, because he kept, in classic movie score fashion, he sets up specific themes for specific characters. And Guy's is very, in a sense, jaunty and slightly neurotic, but jaunty and heroic mostly. And Bruno's is always discordant and unsettling and strange. And yet, how smart is it that in that juxtaposition of sequences, tennis match and shoving a hand down the drain, the music, their themes merge and they become, I remember that the first time I saw the movie and thinking, oh my God, everybody in this movie, whether they're hitting it or not, they're all aiming for the fences. They're all swinging for the fences. Best ever work. And I thought that Tiomkin was being so smart and so clever to really sell that these pieces of time are married, and music was doing that, or helping do that.
We should give some credit to Robert Burks, the director of photography, because Strangers on a Train is beautifully shot in black and white. Obviously, an art form that we no longer see much anymore, but it's very crisp. That tennis match, I was very interested in the tennis match because you explained to me, the readers, that the gentleman that is Fred Reynolds, who's playing Guy Haines, is actually the tennis consultant.
Yes, and Granger's tennis coach as well. So
that was perfect. We got to talk about the carousel at the end. To me, and again, without doing much of a spoilers, the movie ends at an amusement park. A truly terrifying scene. And I have to say that the physicality of it is so interesting. And yet, I guess there was a real carousel, but there's also a miniature carousel that they could destroy.
Yeah, and again, brilliant Robert Burks. Brilliantly shot. His first movie for Hitchcock, and thank goodness not his last, because he was for me the cinematographer for Hitchcock. And it's such a sad thing that he and George Tomasini, Hitchcock's editor, and these career best people died, without completing the 60s skein of Hitchcock movies, because the movies suffer for their loss. Hitchcock was best with a team, whether it was Bernard Herrmann, So anyway, this sequence was a big deal, because that Carnival Midway was built and designed by Ted Haworth. Again, a brilliant collaborator for Hitchcock. He adored him. And the whole idea of that, I just love those those carnival sequences because they're all slow motion chases. I should say they're each slow motion pursuits, and they're terrifying because no one's really chasing anyone so much as stalking the other person. And
Hey, Bruno, hey. I memorized it almost frame by frame. Now, I wanted to ask you a question. I can't remember if you wrote about this in the book. In the story, the amusement park has a tunnel of love ride where you can rent a little motorboat and it takes you out to an island. Did they actually make a little lagoon as well when they built this amusement park, or was that shot separately?
yeah, the Roland V. Lee Ranch where they shot it has lakes
Oh, it does.
or lagoons, and so it was there. And so Mr. Howarth built built what they needed for the carousel, for the rides, for the midway accordingly, so that one could always see from various vantage points, the boats, the rides as they're turning. That's brilliant work, all of it, and it was all storyboarded in ways just as meticulous as the shower scene in Psycho,
Sure.
Miriam's murder, or whether it's the old carny crawling under the it's when you think that was actually a gentleman who did that and crawls underneath, who, as Hitchcock always said, if he lifted his head 1 inch, it would have been a horror film because, it would have been all over. And Hitchcock always said he was just a carny guy, but the guy made, 40, 50 movies.
Oh yeah, he looked very familiar. Well, Stephen, the book, I am going to put up the cover for those who can see. And unfortunately can't show the whole cover because of Zoom, but we are going to show you the book cover. It's called Criss Cross. It is a fun read, everybody. Definitely put it on your list, either for you to read it or to get it as a gift for somebody. I'm your host, Steve Rubin. You've been listening to and watching Saturday Night the Movies. Our producer is Ben Shrewsbury, and our guest has been Stephen Rebello, who I hope to have you on again, Stephen, to talk film, because it's fun to talk to a fellow historian who really appreciates just great cinema like yourself. And thank you for this book.
You're welcome. This is the first hardcover copy. I just got it today.
Turn it a little bit. It's there you go. There you go. Obviously, Robert Walker and
these.
Perfect. I envy you hardcover because my publisher, my latest edition of the James Bond movie encyclopedia, decided that they couldn't do a hardcover. I'm still upset about it. But by the way, if you like this show, please give us a thumbs up or 5 stars or as many stars as you'd like to give us. And be aware of our other podcast, Tales from Hollywoodland, which I co-host with Julian Schlossberg and R3 Friedman. That's also available at podcasts near you. And we're now available on a fast channel, True TV Plus, so you can watch it. If you don't watch it on YouTube, you can watch it there. And we love having you support this show. Thank you again, Stephen.
Thanks for having me. I had a good time.